Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
This is where we take stacks of sources, really dig in, and pull out the most important bits of knowledge for you.
That's the plan.
And today we're tackling, well, it's a historical riddle, isn't it? Something that's puzzled people for centuries. A moment that really, truly shaped the course of Islam.
Absolutely pivotal.
Yeah, and when you delve into the events surrounding it, I mean, they're bewildering, they're tragic, and so many questions just pop up. Like, what was Imam Husayn really trying to achieve with his rising? Was it simply about avoiding that oath of allegiance to Yazid? Or was he, mainly responding to those messages, those invitations from Kufa?
Right, the Kufan connection.
Or maybe it was something bigger. Like,
Wow.
using today's words, was he aiming for a revolution, a planned move to fix things?
It's the core question, really.
It is. And this deep dive is brought to you by the creators of BabelIlm.app. It's an AI-narrated series, and it's built entirely on this renowned historical work, a probe into the history of Ashura.
A really significant text.
It is. Authored by Dr. Ibrahim Ayati, esteemed Iranian Shia historian, researcher, preacher. Lived 1916 to 1964. And his work, well, it's respected for trying to present the true events of Karbala, based on scholarly records, historical tradition.
Very meticulous.
So our mission today is basically to set the stage for Karbala. We need to explore the whole political climate, the religious vibe under Mu'awiya's rule. We want to uncover the deep roots of the conflict, all based on what Dr. Ayati lays out in his book.
Laying the groundwork.
Exactly. We want to start unraveling that central question from the preface. Was Imam Husayn's span a reaction? Or was it like a pre-planned, maybe even divinely guided movement to save Islam itself? Because the book suggests the threat was that big.
It does, an existential threat.
So to figure that out, we've got to go back, way back to Muawiya's time.
Right. And what's really fascinating right off the bat is how a probe into the history of Ashura frames this period. It signals this huge, frankly alarming shift away from how things were run in early Islam.
How so?
Well, the book says the Islamic Caliphate had assumed the shape of the kingdoms of Kisra and Caesar. Now, that's not just fancy language.
No, that sounds pretty major. Kisra and Caesar, Persian and Roman empires, right?
Exactly. It points to this fundamental change, this visible transformation. Going from, a community-based consultative system where leaders were chosen to basically a centralized monarchy, absolute rule.
Wow, with all the royal trappings and inherited power.
Pretty much. Think about what that means for the average Muslim then. Suddenly your voice doesn't matter as much. It's all about obedience to this distant ruler. Piety gets sidelined by politics, by dynasty.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that's a massive shift.
And the book is critical here. It says Mu'awiya, driven by what it calls his corrupt thinking,
Yeah.
deliberately set out to make the caliphate hereditary, something passed down in his family, just like any other kingdom.
So not just consolidating power, but fundamentally changing the nature of leadership in Islam, a dynasty. And the book points to a specific moment, a turning point where this really became clear, right? Something about a broken promise.
Absolutely. And this is where Dr. Ayati's account, drawing on historical records, gets really specific about Muawiya's methods and, well, his intentions. The big one, the undeniable violation, was breaking the peace treaty he made with Imam Hasan.
Imam Hasan, the Prophet's grandson, the caliph before Muawiya took over.
The very same. And that treaty wasn't just some casual handshake. It explicitly said that after Muawiya died, the Muslims would get to choose the next caliph. Through consultation. Back to the old ways.
Okay, so the treaty guaranteed a return to the consultative process.
It did. But instead, Muawiya, while he's still alive, starts this aggressive campaign to get everyone to pledge allegiance, the bay'ah, to his son Yazid.
While he's still ruling, and against the treaty.
Directly against it. The book calls it a clear violation of Islamic tradition and a total betrayal of the terms he himself agreed to with Imam Hasan. And interestingly, the book traces the root cause of all these events back even further to the drama that was staged at Saqifa Bani Saida immediately after the demise of the Holy Prophet.
Saqifa, that's where the succession was first debated, controversially, right after the Prophet passed away, outside his immediate family.
Exactly. That initial contentious decision, the book argues, sort of laid the groundwork for later deviations. It weakened the established principles, making it easier perhaps for someone like Muawiya to later push things towards hereditary monarchy. It was like a slow erosion over decades.
So this wasn't just a sudden political move by Mu'awiya. It was building on earlier issues, maybe, and it was a fundamental break from Islamic practice and a specific treaty. Okay, so he's laying the groundwork for a dynasty. How does he make sure it sticks? And crucially, what happens to people who, object, who remember the treaty, who believe in the old ways? The book is pretty chilling here, doesn't it?
It does. This is where you see the, frankly, ruthless side of Muawiyah's regime. Connecting the dots. Muawiyah knew he had to control the story, control the narrative, and crush any dissent if he wanted this dynasty thing to work.
Makes sense from a purely political standpoint.
And the book describes this systematic, brutal campaign, specifically targeting the Shia, the party or supporters of Imam Ali.
Ali, the Prophet's cousin, son-in-law, father of Hasan and Husayn.
Correct. And this wasn't subtle. We're talking explicit circulars, like official orders sent out everywhere demanding harsh persecution of the followers of Ahlul Bayt, the Prophet's household.
Persecution
like ordering the demolition of their homes, collective punishment, designed to terrify people into silence, displace them.
That's brutal.
And the source gives specific, truly chilling examples. People like Hujr bin Adi, Rashid Hujari, and their 11 companions. These were respected figures known for their piety. They were subjected to the severest persecution and torture. Muawiyah had 6 of them killed.
Killed for their loyalty to Ali's family.
Essentially, yes. For representing an alternative, a challenge to his authority and narrative. The book mentions others. Hands and feet amputated, pins reddened in fire, thrust into their eyes. Even some buried alive.
Buried alive, my goodness.
It shows a terrifying level of state-sponsored violence. A complete disregard for life, for Islamic justice. All aimed at wiping out any loyalty to the ideals Imam Ali and his family stood for. The goal was to erase that competing vision of leadership entirely.
That's horrifying. So it's not just physical elimination of opponents. It sounds like a psychological war, too, trying to control what people thought, what they believed.
Exactly right. Beyond the physical terror, Muawiyah's regime launched this insidious campaign to poison the public mind against Imam Ali and his family.
How did they do that?
Well, a couple of ways. First, and this is maybe the most shocking part, they made it obligatory to curse Imam Ali from the pulpits. Every Friday sermon. Everywhere.
Curse the Prophet's own cousin and son-in-law in the mosques.
Week after week. Imagine the psychological impact. Publicly slandering one of the most revered figures in early Islam. It warped religious teaching, public memory. It made showing reverence for the Ahlul Bayt dangerous, replacing it with animosity.
Creating an official enemy.
Precisely. And at the same time, they're carrying down Ali. They're busy building up Muawiyah, presenting Muawiyah as a distinguished companion of the Prophet.
But was he seen that way?
Well, the source points out that most of the Muslims had not yet realized the hypocrisy of Muawiyah. They still saw him as this important early figure. He was cleverly marketed, you could say, as a scribe of the revelations.
Implying a direct connection to the Quran.
Right. And even as the maternal uncle of the Muslims, using a family link to one of the Prophet's wives to boost his own status and legitimacy, it was a very effective propaganda campaign, building this facade that made it hard for many people, especially later generations, to see the truth.
So the average person is stuck. They're hearing Ali cursed in the mosque. They're hearing Muawiyah praised as this great companion. It must have been incredibly confusing.
Disorienting.
Profoundly disorienting. And the impact was huge. The book tells the story. It's very revealing. About Ammar, the famous companion, totally loyal to Imam Ali.
Yes.
So a man comes up to Ammar, totally bewildered. He says something like, look, I left home totally convinced we, Ali's side, were right, and those guys, Muawiyah's side, were wrong. Crystal clear in his mind.
Okay.
But then he gets near Muawiyah's army, and he's shocked. He sees their muezzin calling the prayer, I testify there's no God but Allah, Muhammad is his prophet. Same words as ours. They pray like us. They read the same Quran. Same prophet.
Wow. So on the surface, it all looked the same.
Exactly. That's the power the confusion Muawiyah sowed. And it wasn't just, simple folk. Even companions of Abdul Masud, a major scholar, apparently had doubts about fighting Muawiyah. They couldn't square the outward religious similarity with the conflict. It shows how effective that propaganda was, creating this veneer of shared Islam that just papered over the massive differences in principle and politics, made it almost impossible for people to see clearly and resist.
Yeah, and weakened opposition significantly.
So thinking about the average person under Muawiyah, it's terror on one hand if you dissent, and this constant, deliberate twisting of Islam and history on the other. It seems designed to make supporting anyone but Mu'awiya almost unthinkable, just suffocating for anyone who saw through it.
Which brings us right to the crux of it. What was the end game here? What was Mu'awiya driving at with all this oppression, all this propaganda?
Yeah, what was the ultimate goal?
The book points straight to it. The most critical, the most audacious, the most unprecedented step Mu'awiya took was appointing his son, Yazid, as his successor.
Appointing his son, not letting the Muslims choose, like the treaty said.
Exactly. This wasn't just like a preference. The book hammers this point home. It was a blatant violation of Islamic tradition and a direct betrayal of the peace treaty with Imam Hasan.
Right.
Under Mu'awiya's plan, the caliphate was explicitly, deliberately turned into a monarchy. Yeah. Full stop. A conscious decision to scrap the whole idea of consultation and choice, just to keep power in his family, whatever the cost to Islam's principles.
Regardless of the consequences.
Right. And the source adds this interesting note that there were two great impediments to Mu'awiya achieving this. One was his own corrupt thinking, his ambition overriding principles, and the other, the incapability of Yazid.
Ah, so even Mu'awiya knew his chosen heir wasn't exactly ideal.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
It sets up the next big problem perfectly.
Yeah, that's a massive departure, going from consultation and community choice to just hereditary rule based on blood. But like you just said, it gets even worse when you look at who he picked. The book is pretty blunt about Yazid, isn't it? He wasn't exactly a model caliph in waiting.
Blunt is an understatement. A probe into the history of Ashura paints this incredibly clear and frankly deeply disturbing picture of Yazid. And understanding this picture is absolutely key to understanding why his succession was just impossible for so many Muslims to accept, especially those loyal to the Ahlul Bayt.
So what does it say? How is he described?
Unequivocally, as a frivolous, irreligious, and corrupt individual, completely unfit for leadership. And this wasn't some secret. It says this was well known among the nobles of that time and the dignitaries of the Islamic community.
Frivolous, irreligious, corrupt.
His whole character, his lifestyle, it just clashed violently with everything expected of a caliph, the spiritual and political leader meant to embody piety and justice.
Those are incredibly strong accusations. Does the source provide specifics? Because that sounds like more than just political disagreement.
Oh, absolutely. The book backs this up with specific, detailed accounts. It's not just name-calling. For instance, even Mu'awiya himself, Yazid's own father, apparently worried about his son's behavior. The book quotes a letter from Mu'awiya showing his anxiety about Yazid's character. That's a powerful admission coming from within the family.
Even his father had concerns. What else?
There are contemporary accounts. Ibn Jawzi, a famous historian, reports that a group from Medina went to Syria specifically to check Yazid out, to see what he was really like.
Okay, like a fact-finding mission.
Sort of. Yeah. And when they came back, they said, "We've seen a man who has no religion at all. He drinks wine, plays musical instruments, even plays with dogs."
Drinking wine, playing music, things frowned upon or forbidden.
Exactly. Activities totally out of line with Islamic ideals for a leader. And then there's Abdullah bin Hanzala, a respected figure known as Ghaslul Mahika. He's even more damning.
What did he say?
He's quoted saying flat out, "Yazid is a man who doesn't spare even his mother, daughter, and sister. He drinks wine and doesn't offer prayers."
Doesn't spare his own female relatives. Doesn't pray. These are shocking charges.
They are. Specific, deeply immoral behaviors that would absolutely disqualify anyone from leading the Muslim community, especially the caliph, who's supposed to be the example.
This is astonishing. It's not just about personal failings. It suggests a total lack of moral compass, a disregard for basic religious duties. And there's that other incident, the really infamous one, the Murren convent story. It sounds even worse.
It is worse. It highlights this extreme disregard for responsibility for human life, for basic decency. Masudi's account, referenced in the book, details this. Yazid was supposed to be leading a campaign against the Romans.
Okay, a military campaign.
Right. But instead of being with his troops, Yazid is off at the Murren convent, involved in what the book calls an illegal sexual alliance with a woman named Kulsum.
While his army is
suffering terribly from fever and smallpox. Soldiers are dying like autumn leaves. They're begging him to come back, to lead them, to get them out of there.
And his reaction?
Utter indifference, moral depravity. He actually composed verses, poems, basically saying, "What do I care if the entire army of Islam dies of fever and smallpox? I am resting on a soft pillow and am embracing Kulsum."
He said that, wrote it down.
According to the source, yes. It's just Shocking. It's not just personal vice anymore. It's complete abandonment of leadership, contempt for his own soldiers, contempt for the cause of Islam itself. And
Unbelievable.
this is why the book stresses Islam does not permit the Muslims to remain quiet and observe patience. If Islam is being destroyed, the Quran is being trampled upon, and the divine religion becomes a plaything in the hands of idiots and bullies.
So silence isn't an option when the threat is this fundamental.
Exactly. Silence, the book argues, would be like the silence of the mean Sufi, which is a really loaded phrase here.
What does mean Sufi imply in this context?
It implies someone so wrapped up in their own personal piety, their own detachment, that they just stand by while the core principles of faith, justice, the community's well-being are being destroyed. It's seen as a failure of religious duty. True faith demands action, upholding truth.
So the book is setting up a moral imperative to act against someone like Yazid. He wasn't just a bad politician. He was a threat to the religion itself.
An existential threat. That's the argument.
Okay, these accounts, they're not just criticisms. They paint this vivid, disturbing picture of someone fundamentally opposed to Islamic leadership values, actively undermining them even, which leads straight to the unavoidable question. How could Imam Husayn, how could anyone who believed in the Prophet's true message and legacy possibly accept Yazid as leader, knowing all this?
And that brings us right to the core of why Karbala became, well, inevitable, according to this perspective. If you put all the pieces together, the propaganda, the religious distortion, the monarchy, and then crucially, putting Yazid on top of it all, the book argues forcefully that Mu'awiya created a situation Imam Husayn simply could not accept.
It was an impossible situation for him.
The book states it starkly. If Imam Husayn hadn't taken his stand, all the traces of Islam would have been obliterated. All the Prophet's efforts would have been wasted. Neither the Quran nor Islam itself would have survived.
That's a huge claim. Obliterated. Wasted.
It underlines the perceived gravity. This wasn't just a political disagreement. It was seen as a fight for the soul of Islam, a cancer that would destroy everything if left unchecked. The whole spiritual and moral foundation was crumbling.
Which explains why Imam Husayn himself used such strong language. You mentioned his quote earlier.
Yes, his own words really drive it home. If the Muslim Ummah becomes subjected to the rulership of a person like Yazid, one should say goodbye to Islam and abandon it.
Say goodbye to Islam.
Wow.
It shows he saw Yazid's rule not just as bad leadership, but as something fundamentally incompatible with the faith itself. Accepting Yazid meant abandoning Islam.
That was his assessment. A complete spiritual and moral bankruptcy.
And the book clarifies his own motivation, doesn't it? In his own words. He left that testament before leaving Medina. What did it say?
Yes, that testament is key. It really defines his purpose. He declared, "I have not come out with the intention of violence and rebellion or in obedience to my passions. It is not my object to create mischief on the earth or to oppress anyone."
So, not a power grab, not out of anger or personal ambition.
Exactly. He continues, "My only object is to reform the affairs of the Muslim nation and to act according to the conduct of my father, Imam Ali, and grandfather, the Holy Prophet Muhammad."
Reform and follow the path of Ali and the Prophet.
It frames his entire movement, not as rebellion for its own sake, but as a principled stand. A stand for reform, for justice, for returning to the core values of Islam embodied by his family. It refutes any idea of personal gain, portraying it as selfless for the sake of the whole community.
That testament really changes how you might see his actions. Which brings us back to that central question we started with. Was this whole thing reactive? Was he pushed into it by Kufa's invitations, maybe fear for his life? Or was it something deeper, planned, maybe even guided?
The book offers a pretty strong view on this. It argues that Imam Husayn started his jihad, his struggle, knowing fully well that he would be martyred, knowing his family would be captured, but believing that through this sacrifice, Islam and his commands would survive and the corrupt powers would ultimately fall.
Knowing he would be martyred, that points away from reacting to circumstances, doesn't it?
It strongly suggests a pre-planned, spiritually motivated movement, not just a reaction. The source tackles the reactive idea head-on. It asks, okay, if it was just about Kufa's support or fear, why didn't he turn back?
When he heard about Muslim bin Aqil being killed in Kufa, when it was clear the Kufans weren't reliable.
Exactly. Why keep going towards Kufa, towards danger, when all hope of support there was gone? And why keep giving those fiery sermons denouncing Yazid and the regime, even when retreating quietly might have been safer?
Good points. Those actions don't sound like someone just reacting or trying to save their own skin.
The book argues they show a proactive, determined stance. driven by principle, by the need to confront the grave corruption in the caliphate, not by external events alone.
So Kufa's invitation might have set the timing, maybe the initial direction, but not the fundamental reason for his stand. His path was already set, spiritually, and the book calls it a divine plan.
That's the term used. Imam Husayn himself is quoted saying, "A site of martyrdom has been selected for me by Allah, and I am going there." And the book comments on this. It transpires from this sentence that this was a divine plan and not one drawn by Husayn bin Ali. It's not taking away his choice, but emphasizing this deep spiritual necessity behind it. His stand was seen as destined, required, to fix this massive deviation that had gone too far.
So what was the goal of this divinely planned martyrdom?
The aim, despite the immense personal cost, was clear: to draw the attention of the people to the malpractices of Bani Umayyah, to show everyone that their rule wasn't Islamic, that their real goal was to face and destroy Islam, especially the Prophet's name and legacy.
Oh, expose them.
And to prove, unequivocally, that the Umayyads, Mu'awiya's clan, were so ruthless, so opposed to the Prophet's family, the Bani Hashim, that they were not prepared to let any member live, that they'd even attack a baby, a suckling, to show their utter disregard for any sanctity. His journey, his stand, his death, it was all meant as this unforgettable, undeniable testimony to the truth.
This casts Imam Husayn's actions in such a powerful light. Not a desperate flight, not a political gamble, but this principled, spiritually driven stand. Almost a sacrifice, aimed at saving Islam's core from being totally lost. And his whole idea of winning and losing. It wasn't about battles, was it?
Not in the conventional sense at all. His view of victory and defeat is crucial for understanding the impact of Karbala. He famously said something like, "If we win, we thank God. But if destiny seems against us, we don't actually perish because our intention is pure."
Intention is key.
Right. We might be killed, but we won't die. Because there's a huge difference, he said, between being martyred for God, for enjoining good and forbidding evil, versus just dying.
Perishing. Martyrdom versus mere death.
And he also asserted, with total conviction, truth is victorious in all circumstances, whether it wins or loses outwardly.
Truth always wins.
That reframes everything. His stand becomes this timeless act of moral courage. True victory isn't about winning on the battlefield. It's about holding on to truth, following God's command, speaking truth to power, no matter the cost. His martyrdom, in this view, was his victory. It exposed the oppressors and cemented the principles he stood for. It really sets the stage for the events to come and creates this legacy that endures.
Okay, let's recap this first deep dive, drawing from a probe into the history of Ashura. We've traced this insidious path that seems to have made the confrontation inevitable. We saw Mu'awiya fundamentally changing the caliphate into a monarchy, breaking Islamic tradition, breaking his treaty with Imam Hasan.
A foundational shift.
Then came that systematic, brutal campaign persecution and propaganda against Imam Ali's supporters, the Alul Bayt, poisoning the public mind, twisting history and values.
Controlling the narrative, suppressing dissent.
And the final, critical step, imposing his son Yazid as successor, a man described by the sources as corrupt, irreligious, unfit, his character widely known, even denounced.
A leader fundamentally incompatible with Islamic principles.
All these actions together, as Dr. Ayati details, created this intolerable situation, this deep deviation, which led to the unavoidable stand Imam Husayn felt compelled to take. And the book frames this stand not as just reactive, not impulsive, but as this divinely guided imperative, a pre-planned movement to save Islam itself from being wiped out.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this part, the source itself leaves us with this really profound thought to mull over. It notes, the night of Ashura and the 11th night of Muharram can be repeated only if another Quran is revealed once again, and a prophet as great as the last prophet is appointed, and a father like Ali and a mother like Fatima come into existence, and an atmosphere like that of Alul Bayt is present.
Wow, that's powerful. What does that tell us, you the listener, about how unique Karbala was, about its enduring impact? What does it ask of us thinking about history, about truth and justice today?
It really suggests Karbala wasn't just history. It was something more, a kind of spiritual benchmark, a unique sacrifice setting an eternal standard for standing against corruption, maybe.
Absolutely. It makes you think about the immense value of what was defended and the profound cost. So next time, we'll pick up right here. We'll continue digging into this history. We'll look at what happened right after Mu'awiya died, Imam Husayn's principled, unwavering refusal to pledge allegiance to Yazid, and those first crucial steps he took on the road that led to Karbala.
The immediate aftermath and the beginning of the journey.
Exactly. Join us then for the next chapter of the Deep Dive.